What's up, hobby maniacs? Baer here today with another 40K flashback. And this week, we are going to take a look at the old vehicle design rules where you can make your own tanks and field them on the tabletops. This was all part of the old chapter approved codex for Warhammer 40K, which was actually the second book of the Astronomicon, penned by Andy Chambers himself. So this is a venerable tome, and we're going to definitely take a dive back into this book and specifically the vehicle design rules.
Spiky bits.
Make sure you stay in the trenches by becoming a supporter over on Patreon and also scoring yourself some free miniature swag in the process. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Check out our site, spikybits.com, for all the hot hobby tutorials, news, rumors on all your favorite hobby topics. And head on over to thelongwar.net. That's the home of the battle reports for exclusive content, early access videos, and more. Become a veteran of the Long War today.
Man, oh man, what an exciting time it was back in the day with all these new and exciting rules that they used to come out with every week in a white, and well, I guess it wasn't every week, or now was it? It was every month in a White Dwarf Codex, or White Dwarf magazine rather. And there was a lot of changes. You know, G-Dub was going through a lot of design. You know, they didn't really have as much of a direction back then, I guess, as they did. They were going through like some serious growing pains in the early 2000s with all that Lord of the Rings money, and certain people wanted to take the company one way and people wanted to take it the other way. They just completed a conversion to, you know, 3rd edition 40K, kind of coming out of the whole getting the skirmish, going from a skirmish game and 1st edition, you know, a classic rogue trader, to 2nd edition where it was like a bigger game, but still kind of took like a whole, basically like a whole afternoon to play, I feel like. And then you get to 3rd edition where it's all streamlined, it's faster, it's simpler, but there was still, you know, a lot of problems, and a lot of codexes had things that needed to be worked out, and they were getting there. But then you know, they needed content for the White Dwarf as well, and this is where the vehicle design rules came out. Actually, a lot of the things that are in this chapter approved book were content from, you know, the White Dwarfs back then, and there's a lot of good stuff, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this book in great detail. I mean, each one of these sections here that's color coded, you can see in the spine here, is probably something I could spend 30 minutes to an hour on, just recounting all the stuff that happened in my firsthand experiences. You know, vehicle design rules, you know, trial assault rules, trial vehicle rules, 4.5 edition. Like, there's so much stuff in here, so many memories, minor psychic powers. It's just jam-packed with stuff in here. But today we're going to take a look at the vehicle design rules, which I think is pretty neat and could apply to stuff today. I mean, I'm not sure how they do the points and things today, because I feel like things like a Night Titan maybe are a little high in cost, but then you get things like a Storm Surge, it's a low in cost, or a Wraith Knight even. So I'm not exactly sure how, or if they're even going from a chart anymore for how they point things. But when it comes to, you know, kind of vehicles, like back in the day, they had an idea, obviously, of how things should be pointed. So here was a really cool, they called it the Rampage, and it was like a converted kind of Ravager Dark Eldar Raider. They don't even make this kit anymore, obviously. You know, the old plastics aren't even a thing, but this was pretty dope, and it was something you could do. And then, you know, designing your own vehicle, they broke it down into a bunch of different steps here. It was pick type, pick size, pick armor, pick if it's open top to fully armored, because obviously fully armored costs more. Work out the speed, because back then they even had, you know, combat speed and all those sorts of things. Then work out its characteristics, basically, you know, how it worked on the tabletop, special options, and then work out its points values. And of course, you got to give it weapons, duh. So that was always fun. So this was basically what you could make right here. So you couldn't really make gargantuan creatures and things, you know, like the Wraith Knight and such. That was just a Glimmer and Forge Worlds eye back then at this time. But you could still make some pretty dope stuff. So you could have a walker, a tank, a flyer, a vehicle, or immobile, like emplacement, basically, which we're of course seeing a lot more these days of, right? So here was how you worked out the armor, and like you couldn't have more than this total points here, like Walker and things like that, or War Machine, the same thing. War Machines actually were, I think that was what they called anything larger than a normal size, a special type of, yeah, that was what they called Super Heavies back then. That was basically the first name for Bane Blades and Super Heavies. So that was kind of interesting. I totally forgot about that until just now. Anything bigger than a Land Raider is a War Machine. And now you know, right? Wow, you say War Machine today and you're like, wait a minute, isn't that a different game? Well, it wasn't back then. How about that, right? Gosh, man, memories, holy cow. So anyways, so these were your armor characteristics here, and you can go over the max. And then they gave you these data faxes, which, you know, basically evolved into the data sheets that we know today, or even, you know, the stuff that came out in Apocalypse Age, or, wow, now I sound like a comic book. But it came out, you know, around when they released all that Apocalypse stuff, and they had all those Apocalypse formations. So there's that, and then it went down the guidelines for picking size. And of course, you can pause the video and zoom in on all this stuff, and, you know, or you could probably pick this book up cheap on eBay these days. I don't think the older books go for a whole lot on eBay, to be quite honest. But, you know, that would be kind of cool to have if it's something that you were looking to get, or you could probably even find a PDF online. Who knows these days? Everything seems to be somewhere on the internet. And then here were some armored vehicle guidelines where they basically were like, hey, if it's armor 10, it should be, you know, a very lightly armored military vehicle kind of thing. Armor 13 and 14, you know, obviously a sophisticated form of thick armor plate, etc. Existing models, you know, you convert, if you had a tank, like, hey, you got a Lehman Russ, I don't like how this Lehman Russ works, I want it to work this way. Well, here's your guidelines for how to do that, right? Pick if open topped or fully armored. You guard players out there know the pain of that one, right? Work out your speed, whether you want it to be normal, walker, tank, light vehicle, flyer, or mobile. Now, you know, flyers were a thing back then, believe it or not, from Forge World. They called them like attack runs or bombing runs and strafing runs, and that's actually where that special rule comes from, because you did get a bonus if you did a strafing run. Not exactly the conventional thing you would think of today, so it's quite a little bit different, and you can see all that in here. Flyers were a very specific thing, like they kind of flew on and then they flew off in like the same turn. Now that's, you know, kind of a little how they work now with the ongoing reserves thing, but obviously way different than what we were used to back in the day. Then you can work out the weapons, and there's a huge weapons chart right here. Basically, Ballistic Skill 4 costs more than Ballistic Skill 3. Dark Eldar weapons, Chaos, Orcs, Necrons, and Imperial weapons. And when this actually came out, there was no Tau. Tau came out in, strangely enough, September of 2001. What an ominous month for the world, right? And that, this article, I think this book came out after, but this article was actually published before that. So there's that. And then you had the weapon upgrade chart, you know, whether you could give something, like, could you give a bolt or blast? No. Come on, right? But you could do stuff like barrage weapons or something like that. Could get blast or something. And then there was some really cool special rules, which I really dug, and this was like a joke, you know, an inside joke for a very, very, very long time, was you could be like, you could make stuff coaxial, you know, where it fired together. You can make it Gatling, where it got like D3 shots, or D6, I forget exactly, D3 rather. You could do long barreled, where it added 50% range to it. Twin linking things, making it shorter barrels, so it reduced the range, but also reduced the cost of the weapon. Titan killer weapons were the predecessor to D weapons that we know today, right? They were a lot more brutal back then. Trust me. If you guys are on the fence about D weapons today, well, let me tell you what. Titan killer weapons, woo! There wasn't nothing slowing those things down back in the day. I'm glad they never made it to the general tabletop. So they basically explain like how all of that works, and then, you know, the appropriate points cost and things. But I mean, you could make like a mega gave stuff +1 strength and +1 AP. So you can make a mega Gatling long barrel, you know, version of whatever, and it was just ridiculous, you know, like, but yeah, okay, this one weapon costs 300 points, but whatever, you know, and you can make all these like versions of tanks, and it was just pretty dope to see the stuff people came out with. There was a guy at my store that came up with we called it the Tiny Ronnie, where he basically cut a rhino in three pieces right by its smokestacks, right? So like three almost like identical pieces, and then took out the middle piece where you know the crew compartment and little hatches would go, and then squished it down and made it like a little scout vehicle. You know, literally just glued it back together because he cut it with a bone saw, and we called it the Tiny Ronnie. It was pretty fun. It could have a troop capacity of 1, so the HQ guy could run around in it and then kind of jump out and just do stuff. And it was just a neat little thing, and it was really, really hobby centric, you know, because you would buy these vehicles to mash them up, and you could have like a, you know, like a big gladiator, kind of like a Mario Kart kind of thing going on a track, like and it was just really neat back in the day, like with all this stuff. So I'd really like to see these VDR rules on the tabletop, again, obviously they're not going to work quite the same because Titan Killer's D, and we've covered a lot of stuff that's changed. But I'm sure somebody out there could come up with a new thing, or maybe that's some content that Games Workshop would want to come up with. And then they had basically the walkers, where you can make your own walker. And Graham Davey here made like Super Billy Badass, basically a chaos version of the Furiosa, which he even talks about right there. And another thing about this too, which is a great idea that you can find today, he actually used guitar wire, which you can see in here, this bent wire. Let me tell you how hard guitar wire is to bend. It's freaking hard. So there's a lot of folks out there. Now you got the Tentacle Maker from Green Stuff Industries, where you basically squish green stuff and then make literally that same thing right there. Or you could even get, I think Dragon Forge, Jeff at Dragon Forge sells casted guitar wire here that's casted in pewter, so it's still metal, but it bends a lot easier, and he's got a good selection of that stuff, so check him out. Really cool stuff there, talking about using metal chains. This was groundbreaking shit right here. Like, you used to have to buy, the internet wasn't really a thing quite yet, so you really couldn't pop up on blogs and see, there was no Facebook. You wouldn't see what people were working on. What people were working on was what they were working on at the local game store, wherever you went. Like, that's why you would pop into as many as you could to get some new ideas and stuff. So when the White Dwarf came out, you were like, your mind was blown, some of the stuff they were putting in here. And that it was really a nostalgic time. And I mean, just right here, like, oh my gosh, yeah, there's real metal chain. Why didn't I think of that, right? And I mean, nowadays you can go to Walmart in the crafting section for $1 and pick up a big, like, long chain of that stuff there. So then they had some more special rules, like making your stuff amphibious, making it an orbital lander, targeting, souping up the engines, going fast, design variants, all sorts of different stuff, anything that you would want to do. And then they have this really cool reference sheet right here, which, basically gave you everything you needed. You could literally sit with a pen and paper, there was no iPads back then, and just sit here and design a vehicle and be like, boom, 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 boom. And I just thought of Army Builder. I wonder when Army Builder came out. I would have to look that up, because, man, when Army Builder came out, that was the thing. That was, like, groundbreaking shit back then, too. Because you're like, wait, I can just make an army on a computer? I don't have to, like, put it on paper? Why do people even need paper anymore? And then it gets into... Oh, actually, this is a completely different section. They give you the appendix for war machines, which were the super heavies of back then. And that actually basically is in here because they wanted to show you those particular weapons. Now, this was stuff that came in the back of the Imperial Armor books around that time. I think Imperial Armor 1 or 2 had already been in print by about this time. Flyer appendix here, like I said, they basically come on, they fly off. The old Lightning Fighter there, the old super heavy Baneblade. That looks like a Maximilian Weissman version. And then it got into making optional stuff. This was actually a follow-up article where they did basically doing gargantuan creatures like Tyranid monstrosities and stuff. And that actually could be probably, yeah, we'll do that as an article for another day. Maybe that'll be the follow-up to this one, because I actually forgot this was even in here. So I want to read up on this and remember. I never actually made any of these, but I thought it would be really neat to do such, because, there's always like the whole big, like, oh, bring it down kind of like mission scenario. You can do some sort of narrative thing around your game store there. So maybe we'll cover that next time in our next flashback. So make sure to keep it locked here and head on back next week for another fantastic 40K retro flashback.
Deleted scenes, bonus content, and all the interviews and post-game wrap-up videos can be located in the Hall of Veterans on thelongwar.net. Visit thelongwar.net today and try a week completely free with no strings attached. That's not all. Thelongwar.net is also your hobby resource for exclusive early access with an ad-free experience to all your favorite videos. Members of the Hall of Veterans gain early exclusive access to multiple hobby videos.